Hey there, I'm Courtney with RCK Living and a full-time homemaker. Here, I show you the projects and routines that I get myself into and hopefully give you ideas to inspire you along the way. Today I'm going to show you the biscuit recipe that I make my family pretty much every weekend. Biscuits are really simple to make and this is the best one that I've found. So let's get going. Alright, so the first thing we need to add is our dry ingredients. Our first dry ingredient is going to be flour. I just use white all-purpose flour. And we're going to need 3 cups of it. And the great thing about biscuits is they're super forgiving, so you don't have to be real specific on them. Alright, so I got my 3 cups of flour. The next thing I'm going to need is 3 tablespoons of sugar. Next is going to be half a teaspoon of salt. Four teaspoons of baking powder. And the last of our dry ingredients is cream of tartar, and we're going to need half a teaspoon of that. Alright, so I'm just going to mix up the dry ingredients and make sure they're all well incorporated. These biscuits end up being like really fluffy, but they're not flaky like you would ever find in like the Pillsbury packages or anything. So they're super fluffy, but you still kind of get crumbliness too. It'll make sense when I show you when we're all finished, but they're really good. We end up eating biscuits and gravy every weekend, and my daughter likes to put jam on it, and then with the extras we just kind of nibble on them throughout the day. Alright, so I got all that mixed in. So the next thing we're going to work on is the butter. You want your butter to be really cold so you don't end up melting it while you're working with it. It ends up melting in the oven obviously, and then that's where you get those really flaky and crumbly pieces, is from that butter being really cold and just melting and giving all those little air pockets and into the biscuits. So we're going to work on our butter right now and I'll be right back. So I got this recipe from, it's called Mom on Timeout. It's a blog. I'll actually link the recipe down below for you, but I have made one change to it, and the only change I've made is how much butter I use. The recipe calls for 3/4 of a cup of butter, and that's just way too much for our liking. We found that the pan ends up super greasy on the bottom, and it ends up making a complete mess, and we end up with like greasy, kind of yucky bottoms on the biscuits. So I cut the recipe down to half a cup, and we found that that's perfect for our family. So like I said, you're going to want really cold butter. I just pulled this out of the fridge, and I recently got a pastry cutter to cut the butter into the dough. If you don't have that, that's fine. I made this recipe for years before even considering getting a pastry cutter. And what I did before was I did this step first. Actually, I took the butter and grated it on a cheese grater. The bigger size of the cheese grater. I grated it onto a plate and then popped that into the freezer so that it stayed really cold while I was getting everything mixed up, and then I just kind of tossed everything in. But if you do have a pastry cutter, what you're going to do now is take the stick of butter, which is equal to half a cup, and we're going to cut it, we're going to make 2 cuts on the top. We're going to rotate it 90 degrees, make 2 cuts on there. So you're going to end up with 9 strips of butter, and then you're going to cut it along the butter so you end up with little diced up cubes. And it doesn't have to be perfect, it's just going to get cut into the biscuits anyway, so you're just looking for smaller pieces than what you're initially working with. that's what we're looking for. I've made 2 cuts on the top and 2 cuts on the side. So now we have 9 squares of butter. And I'm not going to pretend that I'm any glamorous chef or anything. I'm just showing you all what we do in our day-to-day life of living. Which means most of my stuff isn't pretty cooking equipment. But it gets the job done. Alright, and that's what we end up with, is a bunch of little squares of butter. So we're going to bring our dry ingredients back over here and toss everything in. And this is a pastry cutter. It's what you're going to use to work the dough in. I got this at Walmart. I think it's a Farberware brand. So we're just gonna cut the butter in and make a mess in the process. And you're gonna press until you get, butter throughout the mixture. So I think that is good enough. I have butter throughout the mixture. The next thing we're adding is 1 egg. I always crack the egg into a separate bowl, make sure the egg's good, just by visually looking at it and you'll be able to smell if it's a bad egg. I've never had a bad egg, but I would hate to ruin this batch of biscuits just because I threw a bad egg directly into it. So we're gonna go ahead and crack the egg into the bowl and then put the egg into the biscuits. Or I could have dropped the shell into the bowl and had shell in my biscuits. Okay, so the egg's fine. We're gonna go ahead and pop it in there. And now I'm just gonna kind of mix that in. We've got that mixed in, and the last thing we need to add is 1 cup of milk. And I'm using a rubber spatula just so I can get the milk mixed in until it's just incorporated. You don't want to keep mixing it and potentially melt all that butter that we've got in there. Okay, and I'm just gonna kind of use my hands to feel around and make sure that I've got everything mixed in well. Alright, and that's what it's going to look like. I'm gonna kind of reset my working space. Alright, so all we need to do is shape our biscuits. I use a baking stone. This one's from Pampered Chef. I've had it for a few years. And then I don't have any biscuit cutters, so what I use is a mason jar ring, just a regular mouth mason jar ring. It works with the wide mouth also, or biscuit cutters. So you could put your biscuit mix onto a cutting board and roll it out and then cut your individual biscuits. I like to just put everything right onto the baking sheet so that I don't have to dirty another dish, because I don't have a dishwasher and I don't like doing dishes all day. So I'm just going to take a good amount of the dough and put it onto the baking sheet or baking stone and press it down until about 3/4 to 1/2 inch. Or you can base it off the thickness of your mason jar ring. And wait until it's just a little bit thicker than the ring. And then you take the ring and you're going to press it down. And you're going to end up with a biscuit. And I don't worry about pretty edges or anything. My family's not picky, so as long as it tastes good, they're going to eat it. And so we're just going to keep going around, cutting these biscuits up. Alright, and I'm going to kind of pile these ones over here. They're not going to stick together for the time that I'm working together with the rest of the dough, so I'm not worried about that. I'm just going to pick up the rest of the dough. And you might end up with some little crumbly, you know, smaller pieces at the bottom. Those are a little bit too dry to make biscuits with, so I just leave those and end up tossing them. Unless you wanted to add a little bit more liquid to it, but it's usually not enough to have to worry about. So I'm going to just do the same thing, press this down. And finish up my cuts. And my family consists of myself, my husband, and our daughter. And so I don't usually make a full batch. I usually cut this recipe in half, and that's plenty for our breakfast in the morning. So what I'm going to do, since I did make a full recipe, is I'm going to take half of these and I'm going to freeze them, and these will bake up just fine. I have refrigerated them overnight and baked them up, but I have never freezed them, so I'm going to give that a try and see if it affects if I can freeze them or bake them from frozen, or what the process needs to be for that. So I'll keep you all updated on that one. I'll add the update in the description on what happens once I get that done. So I'm going to put 6 of these biscuits in the oven for 10 to 15 minutes. And you're going to want to keep an eye on it after the 10 minutes, and just to make sure they're golden brown on the top. And if they're not golden after 10 minutes, just pop them in for another minute or two and just keep an eye on it at that point. So I'm going to bake these up and I'll show you the results when we're finished. Alright, and here's the biscuits pulled out of the oven. They were in for about 10 to 11 minutes at the 450 degrees, and they are ready to put some gravy on the top. I've got gravy over here just finishing up, and we're gonna have a delicious breakfast. Alright, so I wanted to split one open real quick since I forgot to do that. We're done with breakfast, so we just have the one left. And so we just split it open, and like I said, it's kind of crumbly. It has some layers, it's a little flaky. And that is how I make that biscuit recipe. I will link the recipe that I found down below, and then I will type up my version that I made. And if you all have any questions, or if you try it out, let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed the video, and hit the notification bell so you can see what's coming next. Thanks, guys.